My favorite video game genre is settlement, builders, and resource management. So I'm particularly excited today to talk about how 250 Chinese workers moved to a new town with absolutely no previous Chinese presence in 1870 in the state of Texas, and what they brought with them. Hi, my name is Christy, and this is the American Chinese Food Show. Who were they? They were among the best railroad builders in the world. They laid 10 miles of track a day through the solid granite of the Sierra Nevada mountains. They fought for better pay despite Central Pacific Rail executives cutting off their food supply. Over 10% of the 11,000 Chinese workers on the Central Pacific were killed by the elements, by sickness, or by dynamite blasts. And these 250 Chinese men arriving in Texas were among the survivors. For a term of 3 years, they would help build the extension of the Houston, Texas Central Railroad in 1870. So what did they ask for as part of the negotiation to work in an unknown condition 2,000 miles away from San Francisco? On top of the $30 coin per month, they asked for a store that stocks a list of Chinese items. Before we dive into the items, many of which were, you guess it, food, let's learn a bit more about how they lived. Just the journey to get to Galveston, Texas is already not for the faint of heart. A few workers backed out and went back to San Francisco. They started in Sacramento, with cooking arrangements in one of the cars, to Omaha through Central and Union Pacific Rail, then to St. Louis by North Missouri Railroad, and lastly, from Memphis to New Orleans by steamer Mississippi. Imagine if it were you. After that long journey, what would you eat for breakfast when you arrive? We have here an article from the Houston Telegraph on January 6, 1870. After their arrival at the depot, preparations were made for cooking breakfast. Fires were lighted, kettles were brought out, pans and bowls were placed in the hands of each, and everything was conducted systematically and decorously. The principal ingredient of the cuisine was rice, though we noticed that some of them placed small pieces of pork that had been browned to a crisp over the tops of their pans of rice. Yeah, treat yourself, it must have been one rough trip. After breakfast was over, we noticed that most of them took a good big drink of the hot water in which the rice had been boiled. This is something the older generation still did when I was growing up. In order to not waste the burned rice at the bottom of the pot, you pour hot water in and drink it as if it's like a thin porridge. It's also believed to help with digestion. With the popularity of rice cookers, though, this habit's largely disappeared. Carefully putting aside the wood which remained after the cooking was done, they washed their bowls and chopsticks, packed away their pots, and lighted their pipes and enjoyed the smoke with as much philosophical composure as the most devoted lover of the weed among the outside barbarians could have done. This breakfast reminds me of when I go camping, except I replace the pipe with a cup of coffee. These workers seem to be very experienced, clean, and efficient. So how would they plan to survive 3 long years of gruesome work at the railroad? According to the St. Louis Republican newspaper, the Chinese each carried with ease a pole on the ends of which hung bundles of belongings weighing about 150 to 200 pounds. So we can assume the workers had already brought over most of what they needed. The Chinese store requested from the contractors would be for replenishing when the supplies run out. Aside from essentials like pens, medicine, joss sticks, we also see many food items. Let's start with the staples. You gotta have eating utensils. So there are 24 frying pan shovels, 4 dozen large copper spoons, 40 sets of bowls and 40 sets of chopsticks, 18 large kettles and 16 small kettles. Then we have a lot of peas, 250 pounds black peas, 100 pounds red peas, 250 barrels green peas, 10 boxes of soy. So I think these are actually beans. I wonder how they were used. For the green peas, which I think is mung beans, they could grow Bean sprouts, you just need to first soak them, then rinse and drain every day for a few days. They can maybe make fermented black beans with the black beans. You first soak it overnight, then cook and drain, add salt and leave in a sealed jar for months. It's faster if you incubate them with mold cultures, but I don't think the Chinese workers had access to it. With the red beans, you can make a sweet soup with dry tangerine peel, which is also on the list, or a red bean pudding cake that I covered in a previous episode. We also have some seasoning, condiment, preserves, and snacks like 200 pounds of ginger root, 50 pounds of orange peel, 10 jars of ketchup, 40 pounds of red melon seeds, 50 pounds sugar candy, which is rock sugar, 50 pounds of red dates, 100 gallons of China nut oil, 200 bags of fungus, and 500 pounds of vermicelli. Vermicelli is a very versatile ingredient. You can eat it as noodles, add it in stew to make it more filling, and Cantonese love to add vermicelli in dishes with sauce so they can soak up all the juice, such as using another ingredient in the list, salted shrimp, to make steamed pork or squid with vermicelli at the bottom. Then there's dry seafood, 200 pounds of cuttlefish, 300 pounds of California abalones. I'm kind of jealous they had access to so many pounds of abalones. 50 pounds of dry oysters. There are quite some similarities with common pioneer foods. Without refrigeration, meat was preserved either by smoke curing or salt curing. Pioneers would lay the sliced fruit out in the sun to make dry fruits. Tubers like potatoes and turnips were also a pioneer favorite because they lasted a long time without spoiling. Then we have the recurring ingredient category of salted food we see again and again with the early Cantonese immigrants. Salted foods last forever. They're so salty, all you need is a bite or two to down a bowl of rice. So it's cheap and practical. 10 jars of 700 pounds of salt turnip, 2,000 pounds of salt shrimps. We covered this in a previous episode where we talked about what Chinese ate on their boat ride to the United States. 15 bags or 1950 pounds salt fish. A meal for older generations when I was growing up could just be half a piece of salted fish, some blanched vegetables and a bowl of rice. If you want a larger meal, steam the salted fish with pork. This is a very fun list, and I want to guess what kind of dishes the Chinese workers would be making with the ingredients. In this episode, since we read about the breakfast, let's make some breakfast items from the list. One item that stood out for me is 10 boxes of fuzhou or bean curd sticks. Fuzhou is hardly filling or a dominant ingredient in Cantonese cooking, but if you consider how versatile it is, it makes total sense. Bean curd sticks can be used in stews with meat like spare ribs. It can be used to make soups such as the fuzhou dried oyster ginkgo nut soup. Since dry oyster is also another ingredient in this list, it can be melted and turned into a sweet soup as well. It is also my personal secret ingredient when I make congee, so it becomes more silky. And I want to show you guys how to make it. You first soak the bean curd sticks in lukewarm water for a few hours. Wash the rice. I am using 75% Japanese rice and 25% Thai jasmine rice. Use a bit of salt and oil to marinate the rice for an hour so they open up and split more easily when you cook them. Put in the bean curd sticks, add 1 part rice to 16 part water. Another tip I have is to put a ceramic spoon in the pot so it helps the congee not stick to the bottom as easily. Boil it in medium-high heat for about 15 minutes or so uncovered. Lower the heat, cover and cook for another hour. Make sure you stir occasionally so it doesn't stick. Season with salt and you have yourself a bowl of basic plain congee, a blank canvas for whatever you want to add to it. Another dish I want to make from this list is with salted turnip. Salted turnip is Chinese turnip blanched, salted and dried. You might have also seen a variation of pickled daikon radish in Japanese and Korean restaurants. You can just add the salted turnip directly into the congee we just made. I wonder if the Chinese workers had access to eggs. If they did, they would likely stir fry the salted turnip with eggs. You beat the eggs and slightly season with salt and white pepper. Add turnip and green onion to the pan, then eggs last. This is an easy 3-minute dish I make when I want some more protein on the dining table. In reality, the Chinese workers did not have the luxury to cook and eat like this. It's very possible all they had was a bowl of rice with a few pieces of salted shrimp and salted fish, enough to give them energy to continue the hard work at the tracks. But the list of ingredients in the Chinese store was cleverly designed so it's practical and versatile enough that if they did want to make a better meal once in a while, they could afford to. We will make a few more dishes from this list in the next episode. Stay tuned. If you like our content, subscribe to our channel. See you soon.